Good morning, everybody. I'm Shane Coleman from this morning on day 2 of our conference. Just a quick recap to start with as to why we're all here. This incredibly ambitious urban regeneration plan, the City Edge project, has been jointly drawn up by two of the most progressive local authorities in the country, South Dublin County Council and Dublin City Council. It involves, as I'm sure many of you know at this stage, reimagining the Naas Road, Ballymount and Park West areas of Dublin to create an exciting new urban district. So if you're travelling towards Dublin, you pass by the Red Cow roundabout. It's that area of land on either side of the main road. We're talking about an area the size of Dublin city centre, which is quite striking when you think about it. And the numbers here are quite unprecedented. 700 acres, mainly but not exclusively industrial in character, with the potential for 40,000 homes, 75,000 jobs. And as I was saying yesterday, that is the equivalent of 13 Intels. Imagine the headlines that would make on the news if 13 Intels were to move here. It will be one of the largest regeneration schemes in Europe. It'll be totally transformative for this very historic part of Dublin and set the standard, we hope, for urban living over the next half a century. Just to remind you, there's a public consultation taking place. Really important that everybody gets involved in that. It's taking place up until next Wednesday, the 6th of October, and we really want people to have a look at the concept plan and give their views. So all the documents are available, and there's a really good and interesting website, cityedge.ie, so do check that out. Now, yesterday we focused on delivering regeneration on complex brownfield land. This morning we're going to zoom in on placemaking. That's creating public spaces that are livable and promote people's happiness, health and indeed their well-being. So look, let's get down to it. Like yesterday, we have a first-class panel of experts assembled who have not only talk on this issue, they have walked the walk on urban regeneration. So we'll get to them in a few moments. We also hope to be joined by the Minister for Housing, Government and Heritage towards the end of our discussion. Darragh O'Brien will be with us. But before all that, I want to introduce our keynote head of British Land's Canada Water Development in London. He joined British Land in 2016 after 29 years at Argent, where as CEO from 1997, he secured and led major projects in Manchester, Birmingham, the Thames Valley, and of course, many of you will be aware, the highly acclaimed 56-acre King's Cross regeneration. I'm talking about Roger Madlin. Over to you, Roger. Roger, I think you might be on mute. Are you muted there, Roger? We can't hear, we're struggling to hear you. We have you now. We have you now. Great, Roger.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wish I could come over and have a look at this incredible opportunity. I always say yes if anyone invites me over to Ireland, and it's just a wonderful place, wonderful welcome. So I look forward to coming over. Anyway, thank you for having me. If you could go on to the next slide, please. Or the first slide. Can you hear me? That's me. So the next one, please. The next one. Right, well, that's, as everyone knows, Bill Clinton at one of our developments at Brindley Place in Birmingham, which I learned a lot in the 90s. And he was saying to that lady, it's about the economy, stupid. And I have been lucky to have been involved in a number of major schemes in some of our great cities over here in the UK. And just remember, economically viable, mixed-use, phased development. And when you guys have got to a point where you think it's looking quite good, you need to test it. And look at at least half a dozen major pieces of land in London that have been master planned over the last 30 years, where those master plans have cost tens and tens of millions and they've gone in the bin. And then there's another one and that's gone in the bin as well. I won't go through all the names, but just have a look and ask yourself why all of these master plans in London have not come to fruition and now they're being redone. And just remember that economically viable mixed-use phase development. Next slide, please. Well, there's a lot of crises at the moment. This is obviously a COBRA, and in the UK we have a COBRA committee who always meet when there's a crisis, but they've never met to talk about the housing crisis, they've never met to talk about the public health crisis, and they've never met to talk about the climate crisis or the current economic crisis. So maybe they're not crises, but they are all massive problems and challenges. And I'm not saying developments of the scale that I've been involved with, or the development of the scale, extraordinary scale that you guys are going to be involved with, can solve any of these crises, but they can play a part and they can help to move a direction of travel, perhaps towards solving some of these issues. Next slide, please. Now, the reason I have got the de Havilland Mosquito there is it was a very successful British fighter bomber, and it performed every role in World War II, as well as the best individually designed aircraft to deal with those particular roles. And actually, it used to be able to carry more bombs than the B-17, as you remember. But the Americans, when they came into the war, didn't want to deliver Mosquitoes. They wanted to create their own bomber with their own technology and employ their own people. It wasn't as good initially, but it turned into a very good bomber. I'd rather been bombing in these if you had to bomb. But the reason for telling you that is there's always two ways at least of solving a problem, particularly in the way we develop our towns and cities. Next slide, please. This is Caracas. That's obviously one way of dealing with urban expansion. Obviously on the right, the slightly wealthier people, and on the left, the less so, but unplanned maybe. Next slide, please. Now, the train, when it came along, was very responsible for how we started to think about our places in the 19th century. Industrialization, where cities expanded, how you travelled between cities, particularly how goods travelled between cities, and King's Cross became available for development as a result of all of the heavy rail transport bringing goods, particularly coal, into London. But cities like Manchester and some of our industrial cities in the north, were entirely affected by the discovery, the invention of railways and the industrialisation of Britain. Next one, please. Now, along then came the car, private sector, but private individuals very much like them. And over the last almost 100 years, policies have allowed individuals to choose to buy cars, and the way we have decided to develop our countries have been very much influenced by the fact that a lot of people will be able to have a vehicle very close to hand, and they will be able to get into it. And it's almost become a human right for some people to need and want and to own and use a car. And this is a true story. This morning I have got a picture. I was cycling along the King's Road, Chelsea, and I came behind a lovely Bentley convertible. And unbelievably, one of my old colleagues was in it. He left a business that I was involved with. Let's call him Charlie for now. That is actually his name. And he was very much enjoying driving his Bentley. And in front of him, there was a lady with a cargo bike with her small daughter in the front. And extraordinary, I did know her, and she's called Laura, and she runs a very successful chain of restaurants. Both of them are lovely people when you meet them. Both of them are very aspirational. But how are we going to convince Charlie? I'm not saying he's going to get into a cargo bike, but the allocation of road space and how we travel around cities is going to be a major challenge for all of us over the next few decades. I don't think, I think there is enough road space, but how we've allocated it in the past obviously has been very much on the priority of road users. And I'm not anti-car at all, but the idea of one person in a 5-seated 2-ton vehicle pumping out poisonous fumes into kids. I think we'll look back at how we allocate road space in cities a little bit like how we used to allow people to smoke in pubs. And we just go, how, for goodness, did we allocate road space on that basis for so long? Next slide, please. Now, Dublin has its own characters, and some of these cities are obviously very much new cities in how they've expanded, but how you choose to develop this amazing opportunity. I hope when you have finished it, or as you're progressing it, it very much has a lot of the characteristics of the great things that are already in Dublin. But don't forget, some people like bungalows, some people like 2 stories, some people like 6 stories. I know people who very much like living in tower blocks with their families, given a choice. But you can't push people too quickly to live where they don't feel comfortable. So personal preferences, but some kind of character of Dublin, I would suggest, is how you try and go. Next one, please. Next one, please. I've been very lucky to have been involved in the great city of Birmingham, and in the 70s and the 80s, the deindustrialisation of Britain was a massive problem for joblessness and the economy in Birmingham. And when I first went up there in the early 90s and met senior politicians, you could not tell which political party they were at, because they were all in support of doing something to get Birmingham back onto its feet. And that very strong vision and cross-party consensus certainly made me, as a developer, think this is a city to work in, because we can get things done here. Next one, please. And they came up with a very easy vision looking back on it. They had an initiative like you guys are going through called the Highbury Initiative, very well worth digging it out, in the late 80s, early 90s. And they decided to reallocate road space right through the city and connect the city from east to west and north to south. Largest pedestrianisation programme in Europe, and punch through the concrete collar, as they called it. Next one, please. And we were very lucky as a developer. Argent acquired these 17 acres, now Brindley Place in Birmingham, which had been already connected by the great vision of the city. They got some European money to make that connection through the white building at the top of the images is the International Convention Centre. There's a plaque saying thank you to Jacques Delors for the money with the Symphony Hall and the big conference facilities in there. But that will take you in somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes right back into the heart of the city, walking, and they're now finally just connecting the city and wider areas with a amazing tram system. Next one, please. And that was Brindley Place, which we at Argent developed in the 90s. We started to bring residential into city centres with joint venture with Berkeley Homes, and they tell us that in the early 90s that was the first real start of the urban renaissance, where people were choosing to live back into our cities. Next one, please. Manchester was suffering the same kind of challenges of deindustrialisation that Birmingham had, but they couldn't quite get the political consensus, and they were bickering and arguing and point scoring. And then the IRA did this in 1996. Fortunately, amazingly, no one was killed, but it was a real pivot. It was a real hinge point in building that strong cross-party political consensus to do something. And they did very similar things to Birmingham. Arguably, they then got ahead of Birmingham. Next one, please. But that hinge moment, that coming together, that cross-party consensus, next one, please, is so essential. And that experience, I was very lucky enough to have in Manchester and Birmingham, very much put us in good stead to be selected for the development partner of these railway lands between King's Cross and St Pancras. 67 in total, about 57 net developable, I think. Next one, please. But a truly huge opportunity. And there was no planning policy that said, please develop this amazingly connected central piece of London land. Please develop it as an extension to the city centre of London. It was do some low density cul-de-sac housing and some light industrial sheds. Now, Ken Livingstone, the first mayor of London, had come in, but there was this policy void, and we, with the London Borough of Camden, and English heritage spent a year producing this vision, a very simple vision, which was then endorsed by the London Borough of Camden and English Heritage and the GLA, not officially, but just that process of a year of listening to a lot of people, which is what you're going through. Very simple, clear vision. And we said, as we start to come forward with development plans at King's Cross, please use this to judge us, these principles. Next one, please. Next slide, please. And what kind of density should King's Cross be? Let's have a look at some other parts of London. Let's ask ourselves what we like, what other people like about it, and start to get some meat on the bone, so to speak, but give people a real sense of understanding by referring to what we were doing to other parts that they may know. Next slide, please. Now, building consensus and policy takes a long time. I don't know if it takes longer in London than most places, but it certainly takes longer in London than Manchester and Birmingham, but it would do, wouldn't it, because it's bigger and more complicated. And at the bottom of that timeline, there are a number of documents that we produced as a developer. The first one, building that consensus. The second one, I just refer you to, it's called Parameters for Regeneration. And it tries to set out just the complexities of the development, not saying, providing gas, providing electricity, providing drainage, decontaminating, sorting out the highways are problematic, but we said these are the challenges and these are the solutions we have to implement to deal with getting power to the site, to deal with relocating sewers, to deal with relocating, just to try and inform the debate. So when people came up with well-meaning ideas that were just bananas because they couldn't physically work, it was much easier to be able to say, look, that's a great idea, but we have got these constraints. And I would very much urge anyone to do it. One, because you have to do it anyway, but two, to actually communicate the challenges of the infrastructure and the decontamination and the vacant possessions and the boundary issues and stuff are very important. Next one, please. Now, sometimes you get lucky. I could feel so lucky, and Gordon Brown was a bit grumpy as we were getting into the mid-2000s, and there was a lot of worry about whether the transport interchange at King's Cross St Pancras would actually get upgraded and finished. And it's hard to believe that King's Cross Station was still on hold as being expanded and upgraded. And the underground that if you've been to King's Cross St Pancras, was a building site because they'd stopped all of that work. But suddenly London won the Olympics and the transport interchange had to get finished. And I think if London hadn't won the Olympics, I don't know whether King's Cross St Pancras transport interchange would be finished. It certainly wouldn't look like it does today. But sometimes you get lucky, don't you? But then, of course, next slide, please. And that's what had to be done before the Olympics. But then 2008 comes along. And that didn't feel lucky at the time. I know you guys suffered very much from it, and we did over here. How were we going to get money? We had put some money in. We were prepared to keep that in, but then we got lucky again. We got Central St Martin's, one of the largest schools of art and design, just bizarrely had some reserves that they found. They literally found, and the bank agreed to give them another 30 million. On the 28th of October 2008, we're not quite sure how. It's the 10th anniversary last night, actually, of Central St Martin's opening. And I don't think anything else could have happened between 2008, 2009, and even 2010 in London. But we've been working with Central St Martin's for 5 years. Again, sometimes you get lucky. And we were prepared to deliver that project within the timescale because of the framework and infrastructure we'd thought about. Next one, please. And that's King's Cross today with Central St Martin's on the right. Next one, please. Next, and that's King's Cross. Next one, please. This although King's Cross is big, it's tiny compared to the opportunity you've got. And I thought I was going to do a number of things, pluralistic, as I got to a certain age. And British Land said, we've got 50 acres at Canada Water. Would you like to come and lead it? And I said, thank you for asking. Probably not, but I went to see it. And I thought this is going to be easier than King's Cross because there was a planning policy, very good planning policy in place. Next one, please. And there is Canada Water on the right compared to King's Cross on the left. Very similar size, 53 acres now with some adjoining land, bringing it to about 60. So just a little bit bigger. The world's very much moved on with challenges. Next one, please. And these were the themes we thought, can Canada Water, from a societal point of view, try and help local authorities, public authorities deal with these? Not in a, I want to make the world a better place, aren't I good? But these were things that maybe in partnership with the public sector we could. And we have had the challenge in the UK where the NHS and social care and affordable housing, they're all in separate silos, and it's very, very challenging to get everyone in the same room and say this is all coming from taxpayers' money. And a development of the scale of Canada Water really could help if we all got together and thought about the issues of those challenges holistically. We're making good progress, but it is challenging. Next one, please. And of course, from a developer's point of view, it does spread our risk. If we're delivering elderly housing or special needs housing, if we're delivering student housing, if we're thinking about mental health and how development and access to countryside and social connection and green spaces can help, can we reduce the air pollution stuff? Can it be a great place to bring up families? Next one, please. That's very close to Canada Water at the moment. People like living in that low density housing, and why shouldn't they? It could be smartened up maybe a little bit, but we're not going to come in there and bulldoze those homes. We don't own this, and we've got to accept and appreciate that this is a community, and that existing community very much likes living where they are, and they don't want to be forced out. Next one, please. So that is what we're doing placemaking, or is it place evolution? And I would say it's very much working with the place, doing the new developments as best we can, but absolutely understanding that a lot of the existing communities and a lot of the existing places kind of work well. Maybe we could help them to improve a little bit, but we mustn't go in and be presumptuous and say, you should change the way that you have been living to this new way of living. That's a very dangerous game, and it politically will stop you in your tracks, I might suggest. If it doesn't immediately, it will trip you up later. Next one, please. That's what some of our 53 acres looks like at the moment, very much kind of like edge of town, leisure boxes. We can include new cinemas and new bowling and all the new leisure uses in a much, much higher density. Land is a finite commodity. We don't have to go ludicrously high, but we do, as a society, have to think about utilising land very effectively, but keeping as much green space and room to breathe and for kids to feel safe and play and kick a ball around. Next one, please. We also have this industrial heritage, which my wife told me I wasn't allowed to knock down, and for about 6 months I was pretty convinced we'd have to knock it down. Next one, please. It's not listed. This is Southwark Park, which adjoins us. Next one, please. And this is what's been going on in the printworks for the last 3 years, and we've decided to keep the printworks, half of it for cultural uses like this. You will find in your 700 acres, of course already, sorry to be so presumptuous, but there'll be some amazing things going on there already, and if you can work with them and enhance them and help them do even more things, that's a tremendous start to any development. Next one, please. And again, we did this context of development. to help us and to help other people understand the complexities, to let them get better at contributing. Next one, please. And I will finish. I won't tell you all about Canada Water. I'd love you to come over and have a look. King's Cross, we had the biggest fountain by area. Canada Water, clues in the name. I don't think we're going to do the Angel Falls at Canada Water, but it's certainly going to be unique, and every place should be a unique place. And when we walk through your development over the coming years, it very much will feel, I hope, like Dublin and like Ireland and all the marvellous things that that certainly I feel when I come over to your wonderful country. So thank you very much for letting me talk to you.
Okay, brilliant. Really interesting there, Roger. Thank you so much for that. Roger is going to stay with us. Lots of parallels there, I think, that we can tease out in relation to City Edge. So thank you indeed for that. I like the way that romance is one of the themes that you included there. I think we probably all need to be a little bit romantic about this to get where we want to go. Roger, thanks so much. Now, I want to invite Mick Mulhern, Director of Land Use, Transport and Planning and Transportation at South Dublin County Council, one of the key drivers of this plan, just to share some of his thoughts on City Edge. Mick, over to you.
Great. Can we bring up the slides, please, Shane?
Mick, we're just doing that right now as we speak.
Well, I'll start by firstly saying, Roger, that was a really interesting presentation, and I think there's absolutely a number of really good parallels that we can learn from. And King's Cross is a great scheme, and so is Brindley Place. So thanks very much for taking the time there. So the city, I'll spend about 5 or 10 minutes just talking quickly about the City Edge project itself, just to give a bit of context as to why we're here today. But the City Edge project, it's a collaborative piece of work between South Dublin and Dublin City Council. The first bit of work that we're doing is trying to prepare that vision for how 700 hectares of land right at the edge of Dublin city centre can evolve. And I like that piece that Roger was talking about place evolution. We're talking here about how this part of the city can evolve over the next 30 to 40 years. This is a huge piece of city. I think Shane's referred to it already. It fits within, if you were to lift it and shift it, it fits within the two canals in the city. So it's a huge part of land out around the Naas Road, Ballymount area. And so this is going to take a long time to realise the full potential of the place. So following on from this visioning piece that we're doing right now, the second piece of work that we're moving into is setting that framework and a credible plan for how we can ultimately deliver on it. So right now, whilst we're having these conferences, as Shane said already, a big part of what this is about is a public consultation. We're asking people who live, who work in the area, landowners, businesses, Dubliners, everyone, people who work in the industry, to go onto the website, which I'm sure a lot of you have been, to look at the information that we have on there, to tell us what they think works, what doesn't work about the place, and importantly, to kind of comment on some of those emerging ideas that we have. So next slide, please. So you can see the area here. It's 700 hectares. It's the study area place. It's just south of the Phoenix Park, just inside the M50. Today, there's 25,000 people work there every day. They go to work there every day in 1,500 different businesses. It's got about 4% of Dublin's employment base is based out of there, and has about 1.9 billion of GVA for the Irish economy. So it's an incredibly important part of Dublin today. And there's also 5,000 people who live there in well-established communities who will be worried and concerned potentially about the future and some of the plans that we're talking about. Next slide, please. So right at the outset of this, we've set ourselves some ambitious objectives about creating livable cities, seeing the potential. In Ireland, we have to house 1 million people over the next 20 years, 300,000 of those in Dublin. So it's land like this in these type of locations, which are walkable and cyclable into the city, that are the right place. And some of it is underused, and we think there's great potential for a huge amount of new housing and a huge amount of new employment space. But with that, and I think Roger's talked about it very well, we've got to think about how we move around the city, how we allocate road space, how we provide new stations, increase capacity on the Lewis line, how we provide, could the Naas Road area house the next new Stephen's Green or the next new Herbert Park, and how do we get those new big flagship parks to go in there. And obviously climate resilience and moving towards a zero carbon by 2050. How do we get that, and how do we provide the energy networks and the utilities, etc., and the design of buildings and spaces to kind of help us to get there? Next slide. So what we've done based on those objectives right at the outset, following on from our baseline analysis, we looked at 3 different scenarios. One, could this area become a major new commercial centre operating at an international scale? Is that something that Ireland needs or wants, or is that something that would be beneficial for Dublin? The next option we looked at was evolving the urban industry that exists there, intensifying that, bringing, trying to attract new or advanced manufacturing in there, and what would be the selling points for that. And then the third option was following a more residential-led type of mixed-use workspace type model. And when we looked at those scenarios against the objectives, it was really the third option that was coming out in favour. But what we found was there was really positive things in the first two about higher density employment and urban industry that we really needed to bring in. So actually, what we did was, next slide, we've come together with next slide, please. Yeah, we've come together. Sorry, back one. We've come, and what we've done is set a strategic brief, which the team are now working on exploring about. How do we provide a range of new employment spaces? How do we make sure industry, which is so vital for Dublin, can continue to function here? How do we maximise the potential for new residential? How do we think about other uses, which aren't the Central St. Martin's University is a great example. How do we keep flexibility within the place to attract those uses, so that we keep that opportunity to be lucky, to keep that open, so that we can get those uses in as and when we go. Meanwhile, it's going to be really important, and this will take a long time, but we've got to kind of change people's mindset about this place, in the coming years. So how do we start to do that? And then the last piece about, social amenity, that covers the full gamut of amenity spaces and schools and healthcare and utilities that all go with that. Next slide. So in addition to that kind of big land use moves, we're also starting to set out a kind of our big moves, almost like the skeleton for the place, which we want to be in place to guide all development over the next kind of 30, 40 years. These are the big structural moves that kind of start to connect this part of the city into its surroundings and start to meet some of those objectives. So at the moment, and there's a lot more information on these big moves on the website. And I've just teased out, we've got 10 big moves that we're talking about. And I've just picked out a couple of them to give a flavour today. So next slide, please. So the first big move is trying to create 2 new north-south orbital public transport corridors, which will allow, like currently a lot of our transport corridors across Dublin run, from the suburbs right into the city, but that kind of connectivity north-south is limited. So we'd be creating, there's parts of these streets that already exist, parts of them which would need to be created. And a lot of this is about retaining the capacity. These may well start life as high frequency bus corridors, but they would retain the potential for them to become some form of rail in the future. And we've been talking to Irish Rail and NTA and TII about this proposal already. Next slide, please. Another really exciting opportunity is obviously Irish Rail are progressing with the DART Plus programme, which will ultimately see 15 trains an hour coming out of Euston on this train line, which currently doesn't have a stop at Kylemore. Whilst the DART Plus programme is progressing, our intention and in discussion with Irish Rail, our aspiration would be a new rail interchange on that station, which would have 15 trains an hour stopping on it in both directions, bringing you into Euston in 5 minutes and on into Connolly and the city centre in about 10 to 12 minutes. And with that brings fantastic opportunities for people who already live in the Ballyfermot just to the north of it, but also as an interchange, akin to King's Cross, where it becomes a kind of a focal point for a new kind of centre around that. Next slide, please. This slide helps to show, we've got the Lewis line, the red line runs, from town all the way out to Tallaght at the moment. There's currently stops at Kylemore, and what we think there's a great opportunity here, alongside increased capacity on the Lewis line, is an opportunity for a new Lewis stop. And again, with the express purpose of focusing more intensive uses around that, so people who either live or work in that new centre will be able to directly access that new Lewis stop. Next slide, please. Here we're talking about, and I really like the Highbury initiative that Roger referred to already. It's about, there's two ideas in this. It's about, connecting this part of the city into its surroundings. So one is Tymon Park, the Tymon Park to Phoenix Park Urban Greenway. Some of that exists and some of it would need to be reprovided. And the second is the Grand Canal, and again, the Grand Canal Greenway. And again, turning a lot of the industry in the area kind of turns its back on that. And I think there was a Granary Square, which was in the King's Cross presentation, sits on the canal in London, and it's a fantastic space. And the whole development there has reorientated itself to really celebrate the canal and make it a part of the city. So we think there's a fantastic opportunity here to do those things. Next slide. Here we're talking about, there's some big flooding issues in and around the area. We've got the Cammock and a series of watercourses that flow there, and we're working with the OPW and DCC and ourselves here. There's a flooding issue which needs to be addressed across the whole of the Cammock catchment. And we think there's a fantastic opportunity here to marry what we would like to achieve around the Naas Road with the wider flooding issues that are present, and actually managing the flooding, but at the same time thinking about how can we provide, new flagship parks here that help address the flooding issue, but also be, Stephen's Green or Herbert Park 2.0 for Dublin. And I think, Andrew Grant is on the call as well today. So he's done some fantastic stuff around, Gardens on the Bay in Singapore, which, have been a precedent that we've looked at about using parks to address biodiversity and climate issues, and to use them as a mechanism to attract people to the place as kind of placemakers, if you like. Next slide. And obviously, sustainability and energy provision and carbon, runs across all of these interventions that we're talking about doing. But a key part that we do know, and we're talking to EirGrid, and there's a lot of discussion in the press at the moment around energy capacity and the ability for EirGrid to provide the electricity requirements that we need, both immediately and into the future. So how do we provide a sustainable energy network that is powered by low carbon sources? For example, one of the things that we're testing and talking to Irish Water about at the moment is, can we actually extract heat from the sewer network in the area to power, be one of those initial power, because we've got the 9B sewer, which runs through here, which is one of the biggest sewers in Dublin. And there's a huge amount of waste heat coming off that we could potentially use. So that's we're not saying that's the answer. They're the things they're the options that we're looking at for this at the moment. So next slide, please. And when you put these land use pieces together with thinking about where the new, and I think at yesterday's call, Tony Reddy talked about, can we think about the new Drumcondra, the new Rathmines, the new Terranure, where are those new centres in Dublin? And so we started to think about those. When you think about land use and the big structural or big moves, and you put those things together, this is the kind of an emerging idea we have. You can see in the pink around the existing Lewis and the proposed Kylemore station for a new centre, coupled with new high streets in different locations and retained industry and better connections into the surrounding place. So more information on this is online. Next slide, please. So where we are in the process is we've finished our baseline analysis. We've tested a number of scenarios. We've come up with a strategic brief, which our team, and we're now out to consult on that. We're talking to businesses and landowners, various state agencies, hosting this conference. We've got a workshop later this evening at 7 o'clock to get into much more detail on some of this. And the idea is that we'll, post consultation by the end of the year and into early next year, we'll have a strategic framework, which will ultimately do two things. It will set the vision, set the size of the prize for Dublin, if you like. And we'll start to then say, look, these are the bits that we need over time to realize the full vision. But in particular, these are the areas that we think can come forward first over the next 5-10 years, deliver housing, and what's the key pieces that we need for those places to make those first places happen, because we can't eat a whole elephant in one go. We've got to try and figure out which bits need to happen first. And I think that's the last slide. So I'll pass back to you, Shane.
Thanks indeed for that, Mick. Really interesting insight there, and I can sense the passion you have for this project from the way you speak about it. Roger and Mick are joining us on our panel, and just making up that panel, I'm just going to quickly introduce the other members. We've got Victoria Hills, Chief Executive of the Royal Town Planning Institute. We're also joined by Andrew Grant, Founding Director of Grant Associates, and also Gerard McCreener, Director of McCreener Lavington Architects. You're all very welcome. Great to have such a esteemed panel who have, as I said earlier, walked the walk as well as talk the talk on urban regeneration. Let's get down to the questions, guys. And by the way, there's loads of questions coming in from the public already. We will get to them in a little while, and we'll get through as many of them as we can. So please do keep them coming through. Can I start though by asking each of the panel, maybe as succinctly as they can, what are the key elements to making a successful, livable place? And maybe talk about it in the context of the projects that you've been involved on. Victoria, could I go to you first, please?
Thank you very much. Hello. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Victoria Hills. I'm Chief Executive of the Royal Town Planning Institute. We are the professional body for chartered town planners across UK and Ireland. That is important because we've just got an MOU with the IPI. For any of you who are IPI members, you may be ours also. You're most very welcome. But we are the professional body, we're also a learner society charity. But before I moved across to do this role, I was a practicing town planner, but also sort of just general problem solver. Most latterly, I was Chief Executive of the Old Oak and Park Rural Development Corporation in West London. And before that, head of transport. So always keen to sort of look at the opportunity to bring together transport and land use. So I was reflecting on what I might share with you on the experience I had at Old Oak, but also to specifically answer the question you've got there. So I'm just going to break this down into two, if I may, in the few minutes that I've got. The first one is key takeaways from Old Oak, because here you have a very exciting project. It's exciting because you're right at the start of it. And it's sort of things that I wish I'd known, or things that I think, really help along the way as you really get going with this. And I should declare an interest. Mick and I work very closely together on Old Oaks, and Mick's probably heard some of this before, but perhaps all of you haven't. So, and then I'll just answer that the key ingredients of success, because I've got that down to a T doing the job that I'm doing now. A successful place starts with a successful master plan. There's perhaps a stage before that, which is your vision. So what is it you're trying to achieve from this area? How big is the area? What's the vision for it? And having a very strong planning framework in place to deliver that is absolutely essential, not only so that everybody's on the same page, but also that provides some certainty that goalposts aren't going to be changed somewhere along the line. Within that, political big P and small p buy-in is absolutely essential. So by big P, obviously that's all your politicians, councillors, everybody who's got an interest in making this, in delivering this vision. And the small p, it's everybody else who's got an interest, whether they be landowners, the community, businesses, etc. And really getting that broad buy-in as to what is it we think is a good thing to do here, and are we all signed up to this in the round. Now, obviously, Nirvana doesn't quite exist that everybody's all going to be singing sort of Kumbaya the whole time, but trying to have that from the outset provides a really strong foundation, and that's why this engagement that the councils are doing at the moment is really important. So is finding out sort of what you've got. And one of my key takeaways from Old Oak, one of the things, if I had a time machine and I was advising some of the politicians before we announced we were going to do something, I think we probably would have got a better handle on who owned what, and indeed what their plans were. So some very detailed land referencing. Sometimes it's quite tricky to find out who owns what because of various companies and covenants. But perhaps we may have tried to get hold of some of that land before we did a big announcement that we were going to bring forward this huge regeneration. Perhaps we may have had some side agreements with landowners before we got going. So I'll just leave that one with you. having a really strong, when you've got your vision and your master plan, you also need to have a really strong financial understanding of how you're going to deliver this. Because visions are very nice. We heard from Roger, sometimes visions are so nice and fluffy, they just get parked or pushed to one side, either because they're undeliverable or something else entirely different. So having a really strong financial model, understanding the cash flows of how you're going to deliver this, what comes when, is going to be really, really important, because without that, you're not going to be able to convince anybody to help you with that funding, and for them to understand what you need, where they come in, where they come out, or where they don't come out and have a long-term interest. And by that, that could be public money and private money. But that's really important. And we had a phrase at Old Oak when we were working with the Deputy Mayor, which was understanding all of the infrastructure needs, everything that was required to get going. We just threw in the kitchen sink. And by that, we meant, what's the worst or highest figure for all of this stuff, the gold plating, and then we'll work back from there and work out exactly what we absolutely have to get going. But at least we knew in entirety. You're going to cut me off now, sorry.
Well, no, there's loads for us to get our teeth into, and some of these issues we definitely do want to come back to, Victoria. I'd just like to bring Andrew Grant in, if that's okay. Just again, the same question: what makes a successful, livable place, Andrew?
Thanks. Yeah. So, well, I'm Andrew Grant. I'm founder and director of Grant Associates, and we're landscape architects. So it'll be no surprise that I'm going to really stress about sort of landscape, public realm, ecology, all those sort of aspects. And for the last 25 years, we've been working on large-scale master plans across the UK, places like New Islington in Manchester and Bristol Harbourside. And we recognise that they take a long time to build out and to sort of develop these integrated places of connected public realm, amazing biodiversity, all those sort of aspects. But I think probably most significant project for us has been the Gardens by the Bay in Singapore, where we helped deliver a 54-hectare park for the Singapore government, which I think is a global reference point now for how you can use landscape and the narratives around landscape and gardens to transform identity of a place. And in that particular instance, it helped to transform the identity of Singapore as a city-state. They were desperately keen to sort of really try and sort of show their forward-looking lookout in terms of how they place themselves in the world, and branded the city as a city in a garden. And that sort of branding from the very highest level, from the Prime Minister all the way down through all the different departments, has helped us to really put the focus into Gardens by the Bay as that sort of showpiece for Singapore as a city-state, and to show how you can really use clever thinking about ecosystem thinking. How do we engage people in really interesting stories about the landscape and about the place? How do we demonstrate and explore different sort of systems of how we can manage and create new landscapes? So it's a fantastic way of actually bringing together lots of ideas, lots of experimentation, and ultimately create a really successful heart to what will be Singapore's next big development district. So lots of lessons, I think, that we could share.
And I definitely do want to come back to that. And it is the most amazing proposal. Can we pop that photograph back up, just because that we had? I don't know if we it just popped up very quickly. Yeah, it's just absolutely spectacular. And wow is all I can say. But let's come back to that, Andrew. Thanks a million. Can I bring in Jared McCreener? Jared, same question to you about what makes a successful, livable place. Jared, I think you're on mute. Do we have you now? Jared, are you muted at your end? We're just struggling to hear you. No, you're not. Okay, do you know what, we might just work on that. Roger, just bear with us, Jared, and while we're sorting that out, I'll go to Roger. Roger, you probably you touched on this a little bit in your excellent presentation, but your thoughts on this?
In 2 words, elimination of hassle. That's 3 words actually, isn't it? In your daily life and your life in general. And yeah, I'm not the first person to talk about the 15-minute city, but one of the best places I've lived in London was Chiswick with my family growing up, and we could walk, to the shops, we could walk to the dentist, we could walk to the station, being able to get in and out of places as well. Weekends, we did want to get in the car and go out. And Chiswick kind of had that 15-minute city for me. We could walk to a park, we could kick a ball around them. It wasn't hassle. You'd walk out of your door and whatever you had to do, it wasn't hassle. So to me, the best kind of places are the elimination of hassle for as much of what you want to do in your life as possible. Now, that doesn't mean you have to stay within your 15 minutes and work in your 15 minutes and entertain in your 15 minutes, because if anyone tells me I'm going to stop coming into Dublin or stop coming into central London or stop going through France or wherever, forget it. I'm going to want to travel and journey and meet people. But generally, in a good place, it's getting rid of the hassle.
Okay, Mick. It sounds like we have our slogan for City Edge: the elimination of hassle.
We'll sign up to
that. Do you want to just quickly give us your thoughts on and then I'll go back to Jared on that, what makes a livable place?
Yeah, I think I think everyone's touched on it. I think it's giving people what they need on a daily basis. None of this is rocket science. We all know what people need, and we all know what people want, and we all know what it takes it to make great places. That isn't the hard part about the knowing. It's fitting all those pieces together, and the complex piece for a place like the Naas Road, Ballymount City Edge area is the land ownership arrangements and actually delivering those pieces, in a meaningful and timely way and doing it quickly. So yeah, no, I mean, it's just very interesting to hear the other views as well.
Let's try and bring you in now, Jared. Hopefully we can hear from you. No, we still don't have. Oh, Jared, I'm sorry, we just can't hear you still. I don't know what the technical issue is. Look, we will continue to try and work on that. My apologies, Jared. There's obviously some gremlin there. Let's work on that. Victoria, can I bring you back in? Look, you heard some of the elements of our plan here. It's hugely ambitious. Like I think the UK, like many countries, we have something of a housing issue in this country. We need to build, and is it 1 million houses by 2040? Is there a danger in your experience, in your long experience, that we could end up in a numbers game here? That look, we have all these incredible things we want to do with this plan, but really that all gets lost, and the idea of a livable urban area gets lost because it's like there's political pressure. For God's sake, just build the houses and forget about all the other stuff.
Okay, you'll take me off script now, but I'll go with the flow because I think what we're seeing in England, and you've probably picked up on it, that kind of obsession with the numbers has had already a few sort of political casualties, and has given a few ministers the EBGBs, which has seen a white paper paused, a new Secretary of State in place, and a focus, I think, more on quality, how we can deliver on net zero and how we can deliver great places that people want to live in, rather than just numbers. But listen, I'm not a politician. That's just my sort of observation as to what's going on. So yes, I do think that it's going to be a greater focus on the quality of place, trying to join up the dots with health outcomes and societal outcomes. And I think one of the things that's really important for communities, particularly the existing ones, is a lot of people don't want to live with the hassle and aggravation of decades, and that's what it will be, a site this big, of construction, unless they can see what they're going to get out with it. So having that honest conversation with the community right from the get-go is really important. And just to give you one example from Old Oak on that, clearly, we don't, initial starting point was we're not sure if we really want this level of development coming. honest conversation, HS2 is coming anyway. It's one of the things that hasn't been cancelled, and it's being built. So it's coming. So there will be development. What is it you really want? And it turned out some of the most deprived boroughs or districts of boroughs in the country, which weren't very far away from this new station where it's going to be, were in places like Harlesden. It turned out the community, what they really wanted was they wanted some sustainable jobs for their sons and daughters, for their families. They didn't just want stuff helicopter in and out construction jobs. What they didn't want was what happened perhaps at Canary Wharf, where you could look, see and touch this big development. You could actually get into it. Of course, physically you could get into it, but how do I get a job in it? So they wanted that. So it was really important there that we put people in the ground, not literally in the ground, but out in the field, and opened up, an office locally, virtual office, sort of, to have that conversation with the community, find out what they wanted. And that's going to be really important here, because, there's clearly going to be some change coming. You've got some big ambitions to deliver on. You've got to meet your net zero ambitions, as well as a climate resilient, compact urban growth. This is a place to put it. But you're going to have to, really work with the community, find out what they want. And everybody always wants something. You've just got to find out what it is and how you're going to deliver it, and then you'll be able to take it with you.
Okay, some brilliant points there. Andrew, just to bring you in here, that point Victoria, she makes a great point, and it's a real challenge I think we all acknowledge we have here. Like, we have a very established area here. We're talking about the land is not unused. It is underutilised, but it's not unused. There are residents here. There are businesses here. There are very well established communities surrounding it. Like, how do we avoid? I mean, Victoria mentions, the Canary Wharf, the kind of the shiny buildings, but people are almost outside pressing their noses against the glass. How do we avoid that? How do we make sure that that doesn't happen, in your view, Andrew?
Well, I mean, it comes back to some of the big strategies you're obviously talking about, which is how do we create these sort of connectivity corridors and start to make this feel like it's a joined up place, but building on the assets that's there already, as Roger said right at the beginning. What's the history, what's the culture, what's the ecology of the place, and I'm sure there'll be parts of the site around which you can build some really distinctive places and then stitch those together. It takes time, there's no doubt about it, but I mean, bit by bit, if you can start to demonstrate the aspirations that you have through little transformational projects that link new housing, new workspaces, all the rest of it together around these principles in particular places, and you get these sort of satellites working through. I think that'd be really interesting. But ultimately, and it was very interesting to hear about the idea of using dealing with a flooding issue. I mean, that's a problem, but you turn that into an asset as well. It becomes part of the personality of the place in terms of how we begin to use water as a more sort of signature part of this whole project. But it's about that connectivity, about how we create diversity of spaces and opportunities within the landscape, multi-layered landscape. So it's ecological, it's experiential, it's dealing with water, it's creating a biodiverse contact with nature environment, but in a joined up way.
Okay, brilliant. Roger, to bring you in, can I ask you, like, your experience on the King's Cross development is obviously fascinating. Can I ask you, just in relation to City Edge, what do we need to do you think, to change the narrative? How do you go about changing the narrative of an area, to change a mindset? I suppose particularly in that, we talked about the vision, the early vision setting stage. We want to, I suppose, grab people's imagination, grab the public's imagination. How do you feel we can go about changing that narrative, maybe based on your experience in the King's Cross development?
Go and make the schools in that area the best schools in Ireland, which probably means a little bit more money and some aspirational additional teachers. because one of the issues with Canary Wharf, and I stood up with Ken Livingstone when he was Mayor of London, and they were talking about how Canary Wharf was this glass impenetrable development, and it hadn't done anything for the surrounding area. And Ken Livingstone stood up and he said, 85,000 jobs ain't a bad start. And someone from the audience said, yeah, but they're the wrong kinds of jobs. And Ken Livingstone said, don't you ever tell me they're the wrong kinds of jobs, because there's engineers, there's lawyers, there's bankers. We can't ever be a bloody bank. And he said, there's no reason why your community, with help and vision, cannot be bloody rapacious lawyers and bankers and stuff like that. But he said there are hundreds and hundreds of jobs at Canary Wharf, whether it's plumbers or engineers. But set your sights higher and go into those schools and tell the kids that there is no reason why any of these new jobs that might be created in the west of Dublin aren't for them. Because education, like seems to be topic of the moment, well, certainly in the UK, with our leader of the opposition, almost saying education, education, education. Because unless these kids, really feel that this new world is going to give them opportunities, as Victoria said, and the discussions around Harleston were very similar to the discussions I've had around King's Cross and I've had around Canada Water. Most parents, vast majority of parents want the best for their kids. They want their kids to do better than them, and education is the way to get those kids excited about the opportunities that will come forward. I don't know if that was the answer, but I just needed to say it.
I think it's a great answer. I think it's a really interesting one. It's something for us to take on board here. Jared, I think we can go to you now. Fingers and toes crossed. Are you there, Jared?
I hope so. I hope it's working now.
Hallelujah, we have you. Thank you. Listen, we've covered loads there, so just give us your thoughts on what you've heard so far.
Yeah, Roger mentioned the 15-minute city, and I want to say something about that. Of course, what makes a successful, livable place has been widely debated subject amongst urban planners and politicians. And the 15-minute city is, in a way, a catchphrase that you certainly hear in the last few years. The 15-minute city is described as a return to a local way of life, a polycentric city where all city residents can meet most of their needs within a short bicycle ride or walk from their home. And that's 15-minute cities are built from 15-minute neighborhoods, the sort of complete community or walkable neighborhoods. And I think Roger's explained very well, his experience in an area of London that he feels meets those ambitions. The concept recently gained a lot of public attention because Paris last year announced their ambition to be a 15-minute city. And in the last year, they have given over a lot of roads and streets to bicycle use. And they've announced that all traffic is now at 30 kilometers per hour through the city, which a lot of people support and a lot of people disagree with. So it's quite a big political fight to reduce all traffic to that very slow speed. Melbourne announced the 20-minute city, Copenhagen, the cycling city, Utrecht in the Netherlands, the proximity city. It's all around the same sort of theme. And this idea appears in 1961, Jane Jacobs, The Life and Death of Great American Cities. It's arguably the first time that this appears. So this is not a new concept, but actually we're starting to understand what that means. So according to Carlos Moreno, who was behind the guidelines of Paris, he has got 4 components, which I thought are very succinct, which is proximity, diversity, digitalization, and density. So proximity is understood as less time wasted commuting and moving between activities. I don't know anybody who enjoys commuting. And of course, you're not spending all that time moving around and commuting. You have more time and precious hours on health, leisure, and family activities. Diversity is about mixed-use developments, multicultural neighborhoods, a better urban experience, increased community participation. Digitalization we've all faced in the last year and a half. I won't go into it, but it comes on the back of smart cities and is an important component in all of our lives, but certainly in urban communities going forward. and density, which is an important one. The idea that there's an optimal density that will deliver what's required, the restaurants, the social services, the schools, the shops, etc. And that's quite an interesting one. So our office has done a lot of research into the subject of density, and we start to talk about a floor area ratio of 8, which many people find quite high as being required in order to deliver all of these services that you require. There's no point being in a 15-minute community, you know, if everything is not within reach.
George, sorry, could I cut across you there for a second, because you raised a really interesting point about density, and it was a topic we did want to come on to, and let's come on to it now. I think everybody in this discussion probably agrees with the need for density, but you often run into challenges convincing politicians of it and the public of it. How do you, say with a project like City Edge, how do you sell that to the public? How do you sell that to political representatives?
Well, I think that if you believe in the concept of the 15-minute city, which is about quality of life, but it's also about decarbonisation as well. In a way, the traditionalists and proponent of the mid-rise city, they can't have it all, you know, that, and if you believe in those things, it implies a change in how our cities look. But what we're seeing is an enormous increase in the amount of amenity space provided. So the public realm and landscape elements can play an ever-increasing role, and they're an ever-increasing larger component within our urban developments. And also we are living in more square meters than we did historically. So the built volumes that you see have less people living in them than previously. And I think that the quality of human life is also about that intensity of people in order to provide all of the services that you require. And it does require a different image of city.
Okay. All right. Victoria, can I bring you in on this? Your thoughts on that? You know, density is obviously desirable for this to work, but it's not always popular with people.
Well, I mean, there's obviously some key components of density. One is the design itself. So, you know, initially people think of density as very, very tall buildings. They don't always have to be very tall buildings. They can just be well-designed buildings. And, you know, there's plenty of examples of density in some of our city centres. I'm sat in the city today in a very dense area, but some of the buildings aren't more than sort of 5 or 6 stories tall. And there's still sort of quite a lot going on. So I think design is a big part of it, and getting that really sort of baked down in, you know, without getting too technical, but whatever planning framework you've got, the local plan, and having a very clear design guide for the area, or a code, or whatever you call it in Ireland, but, you know, a very clear, if you want to build here, these are the standards you're going to build to. And getting ahead of the game rather than outsourcing it to said developer and saying, oh, why don't you come up with it and tell us what you'd like to do? I think there's a really strong role here for local government. And certainly in England now, there's a national design code model. The idea is that areas, you know, not to be defined, could be a whole council area, could be a specific master plan area, comes up with their codes. So setting that out from the start is really important, as is, again, England statement of community involvement. Don't know quite what the terminology is in Ireland, but very, very clear with the community how they're going to get involved in having their say in some of the look and feel. And then I think the other big, you know, which we've picked up already on density, is infrastructure. So one of the big pushbacks we've seen in England is, you know, communities feeling we're full up. We can't get to the doctor's surgery. There's not enough school places. Interestingly, we're now seeing schools in the wrong place because of the pandemic. So there's parts of London that are closing primary schools now, if you can believe that, because the kids aren't there anymore. We live in interesting times, but, you know, these are the common threads. We can't drive anywhere. There's not the public transport options. So I think getting that infrastructure study, the infrastructure study funded in terms of what's needed when, is going to be really important for that buy-in, because as I said, communities will tolerate disruption, density, and additional stuff going on if they can see a better place coming down the line from it, and they can see, into Roger's point, sorry Roger, life is going to get better and easier for me, because this is how I'm living my life now. But in the future, with all this density, I'm going to have better transport, I'm going to have better open spaces, there's going to be more culture going on, there's going to be jobs for my children. Hey, life's going to be really amazing when all this comes forward. Yeah, I'm up for it. Now, if you can tell the story and all of that, and to bring in our landscape architecture part as well, it's going to look and feel wonderful. And I've been to the Singapore Gardens by the Bay, and it does look and feel wonderful on reclaimed land,
Okay.
It's great ambition. If you can do all of that, those are your ingredients.
Okay, well said. By the way, I think we have some images of the Old Oak Common, the project you were involved in. Can we put them up, Willie, just before we go to the next question?
That's the before.
Anyway, yeah.
That's the potential after. That's obviously HS2's design, perhaps, for the station. But I mean, just for those of you not familiar with it, the capacity will be the size of Waterloo, London's largest railway station, landing on an area where nothing's happened for about the last 50 years, because it's sort of a segue of railway lands over 3 boroughs. So yeah, big change.
Yeah, fantastic. Can I ask the panel, Andrew, I might start with you on this. The challenges integrating placemaking and climate change, because obviously there's some very ambitious proposals in City Edge in relation to making it green, and there's big challenges there. I presume, Andrew, cost is one of them, is it?
Yes, but before you get to cost, you've got to sort of just get to the point to realize, this is an essential thing to address. It's not an optional thing or a bit of added value. This is fundamental to any major developments going forward, to make them resilient and adapt to the anticipated changes in the weather and the environment that we're going to have. And clearly, the master plan framework that's beginning to emerge for this City Edge area that's thinking about flooding, which is going to be a big issue for us all in the UK, is pretty important. But as I say, it's not an option. It's fundamental. The clever thing to do then is to understand how to integrate ideas for public realm, landscape improvements, play spaces, with these environmental adaptation mitigation measures, whether it's actually tree planting for air quality or shade. We're going to need more shade, all these sort of things. So I think for us as landscape architects, I mean, in a way, it's really helping us, because it basically brings a lot of this stuff to the fore and actually helps to shape plans rather than it becoming an afterthought and just sliding in little bits of green space here and there.
Okay. All right,
I think creating this infrastructure that is resilient adaptation is fundamental.
Okay, very interesting. Gerard, same question for you. I suppose in terms of building, the challenges there in terms of integrating placemaking and climate change.
Well, maybe I'll say something about climate change. City sprawl. Ireland has a lot of low-density city sprawl. Has an enormous impact on carbon output. I mean, there's a lot of transport-related carbon, and it generates a lot of car movement and high car ownership, and that's something as a society that we need to move away from. So, as one makes more compact cities, one ameliorates some of that effect. But you could say, of course, electric cars in 5 or 6 years' time, this is not going to be a problem. But we forget that there's also an enormous embedded carbon in the infrastructure required to service a low-density suburban sprawl. And that those embedded carbon in the infrastructure reduces significantly as cities become more compact. So I think it's an imperative in order to meet the carbon targets that we do have more compact cities that do promote walking and cycling, as well as in promoting a sort of social life as well. But it is imperative for the carbon agenda that we deal with this.
All right, Chair. Roger, just in the context of Canada Water, what's your take on this? How are you approaching it in Canada Water?
I'm going to answer a slightly different question. Sorry about that. Perhaps I'm listening to too many politicians.
I'm a broadcaster. I'm well used to people answering different questions. So.
In 1869, Southwark Park, which is 63 acres, and it's next to our 53 acres at Canada Water, was built for the health and well-being of the citizens of the London Borough of Southwark, who were dying on the job and they weren't turning up to work. And and if you want to be benevolent, you say, well, it was lovely that the leaders of the council decided to let its citizens have some fresh air and some exercise and run around. Well, yeah, I'm sure there was a very well-meaning push behind that, but fundamentally they wanted the buggers to turn up for work and not die on them and be more productive. And here the world is back to that again. It never really went away. Health and well-being of our citizens is a good thing for all of us to do, but it is about the economy, stupid. It's about keeping people economically active and not making them too much of a liability on our society, because their illnesses are caused by their inactivity or their wrong eating and stuff like that. So big good public spaces, health and well-being are not something that you should see as a cost. They're something that should be seen as an economic benefit. And the second thing about housing, someone has said, and I have not checked this out, but it sounds pretty true. There are more bedrooms per head of population in Britain at the moment than ever before in the history of Britain. Yet we have a housing crisis, and Gerald was talking about the fact that for a lot of us, we now live in more space. I know for some people overcrowding is still a huge issue. And in terms of density, I'm going to say something that's controversial, but it will stick in your mind. But there's only the 5 of us listening, so it doesn't really matter, does it? And I said this at Olympic Park to when Johnson was mayor. Posh people, rich people have got to live somewhere, and they tend to have obviously more choice because they have this wealth. So if you encourage wealthy people to live at the Olympic Park, with a 5-bedroom townhouse and somewhere to put their car instead of trying to crowd into Chiswick where I lived at the time, other people start to think, oh, this is quite an interesting place. So if you do the first 6-story residential development in this new development, do it for people who have got a choice. I'm not saying just let the multimillionaires move in, create it so wonderful, but create it wonderful that aspiring people that are likely to be high earners soon do move in first. I'm not saying you don't do any affordable or supportive housing, but when people see those with a choice moving to maybe a 6-story development, that happens to have got great space and great public amenity, and is connected into public transport and cycleways, other people will go, oh, you're not going to force me to live in a, oh, actually, that's quite nice, actually. So, don't force, the most needy independent residents into stuff that, they don't feel comfortable with because it's different and it's unusual. Create that kind of environment where people think, oh, that's not as bad as I thought. Oh, that's quite nice. And then you might get the support, from changing from the very low density to the medium density. Right. So those are two things for you to think about.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Roger. And just before we move to the public questions, Mick, do you want to come in on what you've heard? Lots of interesting stuff there.
Yeah, I think a huge amount, and I think the bit that I've taken mostly away is that piece from lots of really positive discussion from everybody. But I think the piece about Victoria's experience in Harlesden, getting people maybe outside the area that would be quite skeptical about it to understand what they need, what their aspirations are, and figure out ways to accommodate that within the place that we're trying to create. And equally, and aligned to that is Roger's point about schools. Actually, I thought was really bang on. I'm a parent of young kids myself, and you do absolutely, your mindset changes into one of, right, where can I send my kids to a good school? And so actually school provision, getting really good quality schools already then immediately becomes an aspiration to want to live there. And how do I find a house near these really good schools is absolutely what people think about. So I think those two things are really linked, so that schools, skills, the requirements of people in the immediate surrounding area, being clear about them from the start, and really how do we get those kind of initial schools part of that early discussion, which we have. And I suppose at the minute we're slightly higher level than that in terms of kind of trying to define what we need, but the importance of really good quality schools and skills probably needs to come out more from something that we're working on. So look, I thought that was a really interesting point.
Yeah, fascinating to hear Victoria say there was some schools closing in London, which is incredible. Victoria, I'm conscious that you're under time pressure and you're going to have to depart shortly. So we're going to move to, there's lots of questions coming in from the public, so I do want to move to them. So there's a question Jim has asked specifically to you, Victoria, about the kind of jobs delivered for the community around Old Oak.
Yeah. I can stay till 11, by the way. I've changed my diary.
Oh, okay, great.
So I can stay, because I'm actually really enjoying this, and I guess I'm meant to be somewhere else, but somebody else is in that meeting, so I can catch up.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
It's just you've got such a great panel here. I wouldn't want to miss out, and I'm learning a lot as well.
I agree.
So, I mean, the thing is, I don't know what the industrial setup's like here at this particular site, because I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to research it, but in Old Oak, we have Park Royal, which is the UK's largest industrial park, possibly Europe's. And there's an awful lot of stuff that goes on there to service London, but also to service Heathrow.
Very similar to the area we're talking about here, actually.
There you go. There's a lot of similarities. So, you know, a lot of the jobs within that were kind of world class in their own right. You know, we had a real eclectic mix of, you know, because it was close to the BBC at the time, the largest costume store in the world was there. Some very high-end manufacturing was there, along with food manufacturing, a real tapestry of different employment uses. And our ambition there was to keep all of those and build on it and to intensify it, and do some new things with one of the major industrial partners there, Segro, to actually, rather than just keep it at single level, to actually try new things and double deck and maybe triple deck in certain areas, different ways of jobs. So one of the things is being open and honest with the community and saying, look, this is a long-term strategy. We don't know all the jobs that are going in there, but our job is to create the space, the environment, the attractive opportunity, but more importantly, protect the space that is there to enable those new jobs, some that may be related to digital, clean technology, green tech, and different tech sectors that haven't even been invented yet. But you create the space for them to come and locate, co-locate, and you create the agglomeration impact that leads to successful places. And the two go hand in hand with the homes. So on the face of it, you'll say, yeah, you want to protect what's there and enhance that, but you're also trying to create incubator space, accelerator space, any other jargons you want to chuck in there. But effectively what you're doing is creating the opportunity and saying, we want you to come and locate here. And some of them will be companies that don't exist now. Some of them will be tech that hasn't been invented yet. But you want them to come there. Why? Because you're offering this world-class location with great transport connections, great schools. The other bit I would just throw into the mix was culture. So it's really important to create some cultural activity, not just meanwhile, but keeping it. And I love the Canada Water example. I'm one of the few people, possibly the only one on the panel, who's been to Printworks a couple of years ago now. It's a world super club. When we were there, we met people who fly in from around Europe, around the world, to go to Printworks. Why would you want to get shot of that now? So I'm delighted to hear that Canada Water is going to keep it. It's a global destination. There aren't too many super clubs left in London now. And I'm speaking for someone who's lived in London 25 years. So, you know, I know what you did King's Cross Roger, but it's good to hear you putting it right in Canada water.
Brilliant.
But joking apart, you've got to create that culture space as well, and that brings different types of jobs.
Victoria, I have a whole new respect for you now that I know you've been to Printworks. You're going to tell me next you brought Mick there when you two were working together, but we won't ask it. We won't ask about that. Look, loads of questions. Let's try and get to some of these. Stephen Coyne says some of the criticisms of these schemes has been the corporatist nature of public space within the developments, high level of control, lack of flexibility, certainly lots of beautiful spaces, but often lacking a richness of cultural life, which I think is something Victoria was touching on. Andrew, can I get your take on that question?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I mean, I think the generic approach to public realm, sort of semi-public, public that's actually owned by a corporation. I mean, it's a very important issue. And from my take on that is, you need to create identity through the design process, the planning design process that is appropriate to that place. And all of the things that Roger's talked about and Victoria and Gerard, in terms of really working with, the assets that you've got and the imagination of the local community. All the projects that we try to work on is very particular to that particular place. How do you create an identity for that place that makes it special and wants people to be there? Interesting, I'm just talking this morning about a project in Sydney in Australia, and they're really working with the sort of the Aboriginal sort of narrative that it roots everything back into country and the origins of the place. How do you sort of tap back into all of that and bring it through to the future? Which I think is an interesting one to explore as well in terms of the deep history of Dublin and what does that mean to this place.
Okay, brilliant. I'm just going to rattle through these questions and put them to different people because I'd like to get to as many of them as possible. Michael has a question. Gerard, I might put this to you. How can we bring new homes into the place that has lots of existing industry? Can we really create good places to live in this context? Can industry and workspaces and homes really co-locate and coexist? It's a fascinating question, I think, particularly in the context of City Edge.
So the answer is yes. And the answer is that we're also working on quite a lot of projects in London, which does exactly this. It does need to be carefully managed. But I think it's also it goes back to that concept of the 15-minute city. You want to be working within your neighborhood and not traveling to somewhere else, an industrial estate or a workspace estate somewhere on the other side of the city. You want it within your neighborhood. I think that, of course, it needs to be carefully managed. It also brings into the question of stewardship. And I think there are very successful new master plans or recent master plans that have shown this. I mean, I always look back at Pinebury in Dorset, extension to Dorchester, which has 4,200 people living there and 2,300 people working there. So they provided the space and the jobs came. And some of those jobs are light industrial jobs, and some of them are some boutique shops, and some of them are cafes and restaurants. So you can, but there's a lot of stewardship in how that is all managed, and therefore the relationships between people living there and between the need for deliveries, the need for if there's sound problems, etc. That this is all managed both within design and within those daily activities.
Come in on this one. It's a key challenge in City Edge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is definitely. There's 1,600 businesses are here already, and as Victoria said, it's not wildly dissimilar from Park Royal in that regard. I can't remember the figures now for Park Royal. I think it was 40,000 people worked there, and I think it's about 25,000 here at the City Edge area. And as we said, we can't, our starting point for this can't be one of we're just going to go in and it's all going to get wiped out, because if that's the approach, I think Dublin as a city will suffer the impact of that, because there's so many important pieces of how Dublin functions in that place today. And not only would it impact on 25,000 people, a lot of whom don't live very far from there at the moment, and where will they have to travel to work in the future? So we've got to think really carefully about how we do that, and part of it is looking carefully at where development might happen first, and recognizing that there's areas here that's got to be protected for industry probably forevermore. And then I think that piece that you asked about, is it credible that a site where a developer is looking at, and they might come in and say, we just want to build housing on it, there's a warehouse there at the moment, it's employing this number of people, they're doing that, but look, we've got a landowner who's interested, and we just kind of want to get rid of that and put a coffee shop on the corner of the building and a gym and build an 8-story building on it. And I think a lot of the schemes that have kind of come through the system to date, and there's 4,000 homes already permitted in the area, a lot of those probably aren't really reflecting on how important it is to retain some workspace and industry as part of those plots. And that's a challenge, because ultimately you're pushed back, oh, it's not viable, and we really need the homes, don't we? And you can kind of get lost in that numbers thing about housing, but not the wider piece about the city and how important that industry is. So part of what we're doing now is trying to figure out, and I thought Roger's piece there, I noted it down, was in Canada Water was looking for 35% workspace. It'd be quite interesting to hear a bit. Is that kind of across the piece, or is that on a plot by plot basis? And how do you retain, like physically, practically, how do you retain that workspace, which isn't the shiny office building or the back of house office building, but that kind of grittier workspace? Okay. How do you physically make that happen? I think we've not cracked that at all. I mean, it's definitely something that we're thinking about. Jared, I know we've previously spoken about examples where you've done that. And Roger, I think it'd be quite interesting to hear a bit about that 35% workspace piece, and what does that mean? What does that look like?
Well, Roger, just do you want to come in on that briefly? I do want to get back to we have loads of questions, but briefly, do you want to talk about that, Roger?
Yes, the simple answer is I'm not quite sure, but it's probably slightly higher floors to ceilings and as cost effective as you can make it and as adaptable as you can make it. But a lot of workspace will also look like offices, look like whether they are partly labs, wet labs, dry labs. But I'm very confident about the economy. I think the amount of data we've been collecting as a society over the last few years, we all know about, but we've suddenly got this ability to analyse it, and artificial intelligence coming in and predicting patterns and stuff. And I think that's going to affect every existing industry. Some will disappear, but every existing industry's got an opportunity to change and evolve, and there will be a whole raft of new industries that no one's ever heard of, that will grow, and we'll need good people to come together and do things that the most innovative companies are doing now. And Facebook's just taken another 400,000 square feet in London literally over the last couple of months, and Google are building 1.5 million square feet. These are companies that have known about using technology and agile working for years, and they are still increasingly providing spaces where bright people can come together. And Ireland has got many, many bright people, and you will continue to attract them. So I don't think there's one model, Nick, that says, the workspace should look like this. And of course, some light industrial can coexist very closely to residential. Some can't. I think you're going to have quieter courtyards for the 24-hour loading and comings and goings and the shouting and mind the foot, mate, and watch out behind you and the beep 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 beep. But to have a car repair workshop that starts at 8 and finishes at 5, and elderly residents looking over it and seeing the coming and goings, that actually might be better for their mental health and well-being, than sat looking at rain-soaked nothingness out the windows. Some evidence of that.
Okay.
So I don't know. I can tell you about public space if you want and management of that, but I'll shut up unless you ask me.
Okay, all right, we might come back to that because I do want to get to some of the other questions. Victoria, nice easy one for you. In your opinion, what governance structure works best, local authority or public agency in joint venture with the public sector?
Well, I mean, it really does depend on what problem it is you're trying to solve. And I've been asked this question many times by devolved areas are looking to do things in England. You know, what do we need? Do we need a development corporation? Do we need a joint vehicle? And so you just got to take a step back and say, right, you know, of the area we're looking to regenerate, does it cross an administrative boundary, or is it under control of one local authority? That's going to be consideration in the answer. If it goes beyond administrative boundaries into others, then you might want to look at some sort of vehicle. In England, we have powers to set up development corporations, either through the New Towns Act or the Town and Country Planning Act, or more latterly through the Localism Act, which enables mayors, elected mayors, to set up development corporations. Are you looking to do things quicker? And are you looking to still have political involvement, but also have some independent involvement to set up a board with independence? So, no, I would say there isn't one size fits all. If you're looking to bring in some private money, and that's the only way that you're going to get it going, because it's going to need an awful lot of it, then you might want to look at some joint vehicle. But if you're going to be able to get funding from a public sector, so in England, there are ways that you can get money for infrastructure funding to make things viable, then you probably don't want some sort of joint venture unless somebody's putting in an awful lot of something else that isn't money, like land. You might want to look at that. So I'm sorry, I can't give you a straight answer, but I would say that you need to be very clear as to what is your objective and your strategy, and that will then give you the answer. What are you trying to achieve? And if you know that, then that will help you to solve, to find the right mechanism, the right tool for it.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Another question coming through from Brian Kay. Can the panel discuss the value or the challenges of delivering projects with synergy, like undergrounding pylons while developing greenways alongside deculvering streams? Anyone want to put their hand up for that one? Any thoughts on that? Roger, is that something you'd like to take a bite out of? Or?
Well, yeah, as I said right at the beginning, stuff has to be economically viable. Exactly what that means is, you know, the eventual value in however broadly you might want to measure that societally. But, you know, that is quite difficult to measure, you know, in terms of stopping people imposing extra burdens for social services, social care, and the health system. You know, we've never really been able to do that kind of holistic accounting. So let's say it comes down to what you spend on development has to be exceeded by the value you've created. You know, that old-fashioned rule of thumb. If you underground a pylon, how much more valuable is the residential, you know, properties you're going to sell? You know, how fast, you know, will stuff let? You know, how much business will the retailers do because, you know, it's a green and pleasant environment as opposed to under pylons. And, you know, you go back to the basic fundamentals of development. You look at what additional value you might be creating, and quite often that's you can't say the value will be X, because here is an example. If you're creating new places like King's Cross or Canada Water, you know, that no one can say the value of an office at King's Cross was going to be X, or the value of an office at Canada Water will be Y, or because there aren't any. So yeah. You look in the round, and then you come up with your best guess, and quite often that's better done by the private sector. And I'm only saying that because once, you know, our best guesses get really scrutinised, we just go, well, it's a bloody best guess. You know, sorry, you know, you can't get, you know, KPMG to bloody analyse it anymore. You know, there does come a point where someone has to just go, yeah, that feels about right, let's do it. And I don't know, development corporations have been very good at that, so, haven't they, Victoria, in the UK over the year? Development corporations this is a terrible thing to say, but I guess because they don't have so much random, intense, constant scrutiny, they have one kind of big scrutinizing board. They do things transparently and properly, but someone's got to make a decision in these big place changing schemes that is a bit of a punt, and you've got to learn from that. You're not going to put all your eggs in one basket. This is a scheme that's going to take 50 years to complete, and the first bit has to be good, the second bit has to be good, maybe the third bit's not as good as you thought. Well, don't do that again. You've got to learn incrementally, but it's a punt, because there is no book that says how to develop the west side of Ireland.
Yeah, brilliant. I love your honesty, Roger. Look, there are stacks and stacks of questions coming through. I'm apologising already because we're not going to get to all of them. You will have a chance. There's a Q&A session being hosted tonight at 7 o'clock. I'll tell you more about that in a few minutes, though, to ask further questions. But let's try and rattle through as many as we can in the next 10 minutes. Adrian Conway says, great to hear the focus on green spaces linked to the River Cammock flood risk management. Has the design team looked at similarly linking their urban design approach to the nature-based management of rainwater to reduce runoff, pollution, manage pluvial flood risk and increase climate adaptation? Mick, do you want to briefly deal with that? Somebody who knows what they're talking about there, obviously.
No,
not me, I hasten to add.
Not my full area of expertise for sure. No, look, what I would say is at the moment, what we're looking at is, the significant issues around flooding. And, there's a lot more detail on the website about some of the finer grain interventions that we need to manage. But the big, those kind of big moves of the big flagship parks to manage some of that stuff, like we're more progressed on that. And where we'll be by the end of the year is that level, that level of additional detail. So, I don't have an answer now, but it's definitely something that we're looking at. We've actually got people from Andrew's team working on that, Andrew Grant's team working on that right at the moment. Yeah. So I mean, we will, but I couldn't.
All right, Andrew, do you want to just a quick comment on that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great opportunity to really explore how nature-based systems and all this sort of integrated environmental design planning can come together and inform, the design and the placemaking for this particular environment. And our team are very much onto that. So great opportunity, I think, to sort of set some examples here.
Okay, Sarah has a very practical question. Jared, I might come to you on this. How do you get people to ditch the car? With sticks, provide limited or no parking, or with carrots, integrated provision for sustainable movement, carpooling schemes? Would love to hear the panelists' view on this. Do you have a take on that, Jared?
Well, you're right in that it's both stick and carrot at the same time. Absolutely, I think most cities are struggling with this. How do you get people to give up their car usage? And I think Roger mentioned this in his introduction speech as well. And you are seeing that by the introduction of very safe bicycle lanes, that these get filled up quite quickly, and many people revert to using bicycles. It's healthy, it's pleasant to do in the morning. It's not just about their carbon footprint, they enjoy doing that. And we've certainly seen in London in the last 15 years that safer cycling has promoted a lot of people to give up car usage. I don't know how much that can continue. I mean, Paris has definitely decided to go very strongly in that direction. And we'll be able to look at that city in a few years' time and to see the results of that.
Okay, brilliant. This might be my favourite question of the lot. Don't worry, I'm not going to put it to any of you. There are some illegal warehouse raves happening in the Naas Road, Bluebell area. Will this current activity be catered for or considered? I think we might just pass on that question. Please put all the road signage in Irish. Gaurav Mahagut says Sir Ivor. Mike wonders, if the state don't own the land, can they really provide these new big public spaces or cultural uses that are being mentioned. Victoria, do you have a view on that? Obviously, without knowing the exact landscape we're talking about here, do you have a take on that? Is state intervention, is state ownership, can you work around that if you don't have that?
Yeah, well, absolutely you can, because that's why you have a strong spatial planning framework that sets out what's going where and how it's going there. So, you know, yes, the state can deliver that, but you've got some fantastic examples where the private sector can deliver it. We've talked about King's Cross, but it's an obvious one. So it's, you know, you don't have to have all the land ownership in state or indeed one particular ownership. What you need to have is a clear strategy and a clear mechanism, which is your planning framework, your local plan, or whichever statutory wraparound you put on it, which sets out the intended delivery for it. So, you know, now the issue comes if the landowner isn't going to play ball, and that's why we have compulsory purchase powers. But it's really important that you set out what's intended and you get that all locked down first, because if they're not going to come forward, then, you know, the conversation, if they don't want to work in partnership, then that's when the conversation progresses as to, well, how do we move this one forward? But obviously the best way to do things is to show people the benefit and the value that it's going to add to their own land holding by doing something quite special and unique. You know, we've got some great case studies we already discussed this morning on that.
Okay, thanks for that, Victoria. Mick, interesting question here from somebody also called Mick, which I think maybe cuts to or goes to what maybe people living or in these surrounding areas, their concerns may be, and I'd like to put it to you. My house borders this new project area. I work in one of the businesses that you propose relocating. In regards to your intentions to knit into existing neighbourhoods, what does that mean in actual practice? For people living in an area where resources are already stretched, how do you make sure existing residents aren't left behind? That is a very justifiable concern, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, no, it totally is. I mean, I don't live at the edge of the city edge area, but if I did, I'd have the same concerns. You know, places around Walkinstown, Drimna, Inchicore, Clondalkin, already stretched, schools and traffic and you know, access to different services. Absolutely. I mean, the starting point, because I think there's a couple of parts of that question with me, Shane. The starting point for us is what does this area need to, for want of a better phrase, be self-sustaining? Like, what services do we need here to accommodate the people who are going to live and work here? We'll never win this over if we're expecting people who move into this place to tap in and use the services that are already strained in the wider area. That cannot be the starting point for this thinking. And in terms of the second kind of part of that, it's, you know, and I think Victoria kind of touched on this, you know, there is as well, it's like, our intention here is, as we've said many times before, it's not to wipe out existing businesses that are there. There's already a number of landowners in the area who are entrepreneurs, and we talked about this yesterday, who are entrepreneurs in their own right and see the opportunity here to do something different with the landholding that they have and the business that they have. And for us, it's work. The starting point is absolutely working in those areas where we know change is ready to evolve. Like, evolution is there. It's kind of gearing up for it. And for us, that's the starting point. It isn't picking out individual sites and say, right, that's exactly what we need now, next, and we're going to come after that piece of land. That, you know, it's figuring out how we do this as an evolution, as opposed to a big state heavy hand coming in and being dropped on everything. Now, there might be elements of the area where we do need to address a significant flooding or a utility or a parks issue, where a piece of land may be needed to facilitate that. We're nowhere near that level of understanding about the place at the moment, but I suppose what we do know is there might be some interventions needed from the state to take a more proactive role in making something happen that has to, for the greater good. But like, that's a good bit away before we kind of have any understanding about that. But look, I get people in the area will be concerned, and I know trying to reassure people won't, until they kind of see what it means for them on the ground. And I think that will come in time, but we're not quite at that point just yet.
Okay, all right. Thanks for that, Mick. We are about to be joined in a minute by the Minister for Housing here. But just before we might have time to squeeze in one last question. Andrew, I might put it to you. It's a question from TPD saying, you've mentioned the importance of large-scale landmark cultural uses. How do we plan for the creation, not just consumption of culture? These uses have been priced out of the city centre of Dublin where competition with other property uses exist. Any examples of this done well? Just as briefly as you can, Andrew, if you don't mind. Thank you.
I think I'm not sure I'm the best person to try and answer that one, but I think, yeah, personally, I'm not sure if I can respond to that one. I'm not the cultural specialist.
No, fair enough. Sorry, that's grand. I suppose culture covers. Victoria, you want to come in here?
Yeah, I mean, what we did in Park Royal was we worked with national funders of cultural heritage. I think another panelist already mentioned you've got to find the unique thing for your area. And we developed a bit of a brand with Old Oak, which is sort of made in Park Royal. It's the makers, it's the craft heritage in the area. I've talked about the industrial side, but there's a real craft heritage, to do with the needlework, the costume design for the BBC, the whole lot. And being able to get some access to heritage lottery funding to support some of those crafting activities, outreach work, pop-up events, that kind of thing. And that will be your meanwhile stuff that can carry on for many years. I mean, Old Oak, we kicked off the project back in 14-15. I still get the newsletter in my inbox, and there's loads of that stuff going on now to create that sort of energy and to retain some of that unique opportunity so that it doesn't sort of get wiped out or lost as things start to change, as the station starts to rise out the ground. So I think it's working with some of the kind of national funders who will be looking for unique projects that, if there's already some cultural heritage within there, you do actually have to go out and walk the streets and find some of this stuff. It's hidden in workshops. That's a really exciting thing. So yeah, you've got to be prepared to walk the miles around the place and knock on the doors and find out what's going on. Some of it may be illegal, but that's it's fun because you can find a way to make it legal into actually we like what we're doing. How can we keep it here?
I like your style, Victoria. Paul, another listener is asking. We don't quite have the minister yet. No. What is your opinion on the reuse of abandoned or derelict buildings? Gerard or Andrew, do you want to come in on this?
Sorry, what's the question again? The benefit or the...
Yeah, like your opinion on the reuse of abandoned or derelict buildings. I suppose, do you knock or do you use what's already there?
Yeah, well, this is another, of course, big debate in terms of embedded carbon in buildings, where everybody's been urged to look more carefully at existing buildings to see whether reuse is possible, and not just think that it's going to be demolished without considering this. And also, of course, there can be buildings that may not be, the most amazing pieces of architecture, but they can have a historical and cultural significance in an area. They can be recognized in an area. They can be loved in an area, and they can be part of the history of the area. So all of this should be considered, and they can also bring character to, rather than everything being new. The renovation and the extension of something can actually have much more character sometimes than new buildings. So all of this needs to be considered absolutely very carefully.
Okay, Andrew, just to come back, because I hoped we'd get a chance to discuss it in the panel, but we just ran out of time there. The extraordinary gardens on the bay in Singapore, which I know you were involved in, we didn't touch so much on the wider issue of public spaces, because it strikes me in terms of desirability and putting out a message that, to people that you come and live here, that public spaces are crucial. Just any thoughts maybe for us here as to what way we should be thinking?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, what I was hoping to say was that the public spaces, the public parks are, they're going to be the part of the core fabric of this new neighborhood. And if we're starting from scratch, they need time to evolve and mature. And, the example of Singapore, Gardens by the Bay, as actually going in straight away and building a most amazing park, which becomes not just an international sort of icon and sort of tourist destination, but it's actually a very, very favoured park for Singaporeans who have easy access to it through the public transport, and they make regular sort of visits to it. That investment up front in creating a place through landscape, I think is really interesting. The same happened at New Islington in Manchester. The waterway system, the park, the public framework was actually put in place first, and helped to shape the identity of that part of Manchester, which is now one of the favourite places to buy and to live in. So there's so many examples of that. If you can get that right, you really have the potential to sort of kickstart the identity and amazing place to be.
Yeah, I think you can see that in what you've done in Singapore. Listen, thank you so much, Andrew, for your time. We really appreciate it. Thanks as well to Victoria, to Jared, to Roger, and of course to Mick as well. Thanks. Absolutely fascinating. Loads for us to think about. I really found that really enjoyable and really informative. So thanks to all of you. I'm delighted to say that we have the Minister for Housing, Local Government and Heritage, Darragh O'Brien. Minister, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us. Just your thoughts. I know you're planning big things over the next 10 years with your Housing for All plan. It strikes me that this is the kind of thing we need to be doing in this country, this project.
Look, absolutely, Shane, and really happy to be here to close off the conference this morning. And the City Edge, it is a vision, but it's a vision with real ambition, and there's a realism streak running through it. This has been done before. I know the conference has heard from colleagues in Denmark and Holland as to how large regeneration projects have happened and have been done successfully. And we've done it in Ireland too before, to varying degrees of success. If we look at our docklands and look at what that was 20 years ago, look where it is now. Look at Adamstown. But we can always do better. And I really want to commend South Dublin County Council and DCC for having the vision and the ambition, in putting out the City Edge now, which could have a population in time greater than Galway City, out for public consultation to let people see it, to look at how we can use our lands better. And the state has a big role in it, Shane, and you've mentioned there that our ambition as a state, it's very timely, because only 3 weeks ago now we've published Housing for All, which is the first time a government have published a multi-annual housing plan that's fully funded to deliver 300,000 new homes between now and 2030. Nearly 60,000 affordable homes, 90,000 social homes as well, that are badly needed, and we need it, but we make real strides in tackling the housing crisis. And I'm absolutely convinced that with the expertise that you've seen over the 2 days here on this conference, and all the other knowledge, expertise and know-how that we have in this country and internationally, that we can make real strides in this space, that we have the capability, the know-how, the determination, but now we have the finance and the plan and a radical plan to do it. Yeah. But turning back to City Edge specifically, it is absolutely appropriate that our planning authorities, and here we have two large planning authorities coming together, looking at, how best our land can be used. And a lot of that is existing use. We have existing businesses there, existing populations there that need to be consulted with, and that's good and proper that we're showing a vision into the future. The state needs to do more of this too, and just to let colleagues know and your contributors about, the role that we see our Land Development Agency now that I've set up on a statutory legislative footing, that we're going to capitalise it to the tune of 3.5 billion as well, that's going to develop state lands that are lying idle. And I actually believe, as Minister for Housing, that we need to lead by example in making sure that our lands are used in a productive way, that we look at all our state agencies that have large land holdings that aren't actually being, in many instances, used productively, and we need to do so. So City Edge is actually complementary to my vision and government's vision for where we want housing to go, and where we want development to go, and where we want our population to be living in sustainable communities, and looking at our brownfield developments as well, particularly in our cities, our capital and our regional cities. And then we've a job to do with regard to the balanced regional development, which we back up extensively through our Urban Regeneration and Development Fund, and only this year we've allocated over 1.3 billion to really good projects in cities like Limerick, like Galway, like inner city Dublin as well, Tralee, Killarney, Ballina, Castlebar, you know, that's going to actually help unlock brownfield site development in particular, and really realize the potential of our cities, our regional cities, and our large regional towns too. So I think this has been, it's really impressive. You're looking at 700 hectares of land here in this space, the potential to deliver 40,000 plus homes, new businesses, new communities for people, place to live for 70,000 people. So in 40 years time, and this, we do need to have that vision into the future and how this can be scaled up. So I think it's really exciting, Shane, to be honest with you.
And just before you go, I know you're under time pressure.
Okay.
A great plan, an achievable plan?
Yes, I believe so. I've had the pleasure of actually Mick Mulhern and Danny brought me through the plan a number of weeks ago. Absolutely achievable, absolutely doable. Shows that vision that's actually needed and that ambition, but it is realistic, and it has my support, and it has this government's support, and I really want to see this progress, and I believe we will. I believe we'll see that, and I want to commend everyone who's been involved in this. I know you've had a really good couple of days as well. You've heard, you know, best practice across our European colleagues as well. And I think that in itself has been very useful to show the interest that that is in City Edge. Very exciting. Could be the largest regeneration project in Europe when this gets off the ground.
It could. Minister, I know you're under time pressure. Thanks so much for dropping in to say hello. We really appreciate it. The Minister for Housing there, Dara O'Brien, thank you indeed. Minister, look, that's our lot for today. I don't know about you, I found that really insightful, really fascinating. As I said, loads for all of us to think over. A full recording of the conference will be available to watch later today on the website, cityedge.ie. Do check out that website, by the way, loads of stuff on that. Can I remind you, and apologise if I didn't get to your questions, brilliant questions coming through, we didn't get to all of them. Can I remind you that there is a public presentation and Q&A session tonight, 7 o'clock, hosted by South Dublin County Council and Dublin City Council, open to the public, and you can learn more about the project and put questions to the master plan team. I think details of that are probably hopefully coming up on your screen now, but you can certainly find out more on the website. Just a final reminder, we want you to have your say. The public consultation is open until next Wednesday. Log on to cityedge.ie, have a look at the concept plan, and do let us know what you think. It's been a pleasure to have your company today. Thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. Take care.